So right now, you have an entrepreneur's approach to rebuilding the country. You've called it America 2.0, which I then started running around stealing from you. You know, credit to you if anyone asks. I'm crediting
I'm
you
sure I
right
stole it
now.
from somebody. I don't know where it came from.
So, so one of the things that you and I disagreed on before, though, at this point you're, you know, like open to anything, is universal basic income, which you know
Yeah,
that like that I ran
I know.
on it. Um, and at the time, like you were not wholeheartedly positive on the idea. Like, would love to talk through what your biggest
Sure.
reservations were, and whether or not you still have those reservations, or whether you think that this is something we should be looking harder at.
Sure. Happy, love to discuss it, obviously. I'm for CBI, caretaker basic income. All right. 100% for, because that's a job, and that's a productive job that improves society dramatically. You know, and I think we do need to be providing economic support to people who are caretakers for their parents, their kids, their grandparents, whoever it may be, stay at home and don't have a traditional job. Absolutely, positively. Because the key element in my mind, and why I'm not a big fan of UBI, is the concept of productivity. You know, and I know this sounds awful, but, you know, to paraphrase the old John Kennedy line, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? I think for us to get through this quickly, or as quickly as we possibly can, the jobs that we pay for from the federal government has to have an element of productivity as opposed to just choice. Now, I'm not saying we force people into specific jobs. Every job has got to be optional. You can't, you know, this is still the United States of America. You can't constrict people into doing specific
You
jobs.
can't be like, you're now like a road worker. You know,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like we're
Yeah,
on like
no.
a chain gang.
Yeah, exactly not. You know, if you want any money, no, no, not at all. I'm not saying we get rid of unemployment or anything like that. But at the same time, I think we have a very specific need to make jobs and things we pay for as the federal government have some productive impact. And that's not to say under UBI, all the things that people do can't be productive and aren't often productive, but it's not a necessity or a requirement of UBI. And that's my hesitancy.
Well, so two things I'd say to that, Mark, and you know, you and I like agree on a lot of the big picture needs for
Look, hey,
sure.
I love open conversations like this are awesome. This is how I learn. And if I'm wrong, I need to change my mind, I'll be the first to do it.
Yeah, and I know that about you too. I think couldn't agree with you more that if you're like a stay-at-home mom or someone who's taking care of your aging relative, it's like we need to get you basic support, and probably the person you're taking care of. One hesitancy I have about having this definition of productivity baked into whether or not you get this income, I feel like our government may not be the like best arbiter of what is and isn't productive. And if you were to take, let's say, even one of us, like at some point in our entrepreneurial past, like our parents or whomever would be like, that's wholly unproductive or whatever you're doing,
Right.
because
No, no
they think that our, like, you know, our business is never going to work, or our rock band is never going to work out, or
of
whatever it
course.
happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Look, again, there's value to any income, any money that you make available to somebody, no question about it. And people will use it differently. But where we are right now, again, timing is the critical variable. And so for where we are, I would rather, as inefficient and awful and terrible and ineffective as government is, this is really just a mass play, right? It's a scatter shot and see what sticks. And
Which is what they did in the New Deal during the Great Depression. It's not like they had some brilliant plan and we're like, we can do all this stuff. They were just like, let's just do everything
throw it up against the
we
wall
can.
and see what sticks, right? And you try to make your wins big wins and your losses little losses. And, you know, there's nobody right now that I get excited about in government who's capable of this. Maybe you can be that guy. Maybe I'll be that guy. Maybe together we'll be that guy. Or
together,
person.
Man, we'll be like entrepreneur Voltron.
Yeah, right. But to me, that's what's critical, right? And so, you know, in previous times, you know, I would have been more open to the traditional UBI argument because time, it wasn't nearly as critical. You know, we were humming along.
But don't you think pure UBI is like the fastest thing we could do, because it's just like press that button, like get the cash out, and I don't need to have some process in place to figure out.
Well, effectively, that's what I said. But there's got to be, you know, in my mind, you want to have a point where they say, okay, I've got to go back to work, right? Because the other side of it is, if companies don't have, so look what's happening. Here's my other principal argument against UBI. Look what's happening right now with people who are making more from unemployment because of the CARES bonus than they were in their previous job. 68% of people are in that position.
Yeah, it's a problem.
They don't want to go back to work. And so now you've got these companies that are unable to hire people, and those are the small businesses that need employees. Now, I recognize $1,000, and I'm not saying that UBI recipients are lazy or don't want to work or anything like that at all, but just the economics of it are $1,000,
Well, here's the thing, Mark. A lot of those people aren't going back to work because they have unemployment benefits that obviously they went back to work, they'd lose those benefits.
Right.
If they were in a situation where they could go back to the bowling alley and they got to keep the $1,000 a month, like I think that's actually a tougher decision for them than the clear decision of like, hey, you get this money, but if you go back to work, you lose it.
But isn't the extra $600 effectively short-term UBI?
And that's something like I would never have wedded that $600 unemployment benefit to not working. You know what I mean? Like right. I would have been like, hey, let's.
Right. No, that's a great point, right? But still, the reality is, like the 25-year-old me or 21-year-old me might have just said, look, my $1,000, I've got 5 roommates, I don't need to work, and then the productive me might not have been in society. Or I guess arguably productive me might not have been in society.
Well, and this goes back to something else you've championed, because you're looking at like a Swiss Army knife approach to what's going on in the economy. You're saying we should elevate the minimum wage to like have a federal minimum wage of $15, which I got the sense you were proposing that across the board. Is that right?
Yeah, because you got to make it so all businesses play by the same rules. And it was meant to be for 18 and over only, because you still want kids to be able to get their job at 16. Yeah. But at the same time, when you have these transitional work programs like the testing, tracking, tracing, by paying them above that minimum wage, you also indirectly set the federal minimum wage. And the argument against it has been it'll damage smaller companies and smaller locations. But really where the negative impact has come from is the variability between communities and between states. So you just go across the state line and it's cheaper there, so people move there. That's why it needs to be federally driven, whether it's indirect by hiring enough people that pays a lot more than the minimum wage, or it's direct and to the point where anybody 18 or above, the number's $15.
So one of the things that I think helps mitigate the issue you're describing is like, hey, people won't go back to work, is like right now, a lot of these businesses are paying very, very low wages. And so if you're looking at like, so I agree with you that if you're like, you have a fast food job that pays you like $9-10 an hour, you'd be like, wait a minute, like, am I really going to do this work if like I'm not going to starve to death in the absence of this job? Right. But so it requires employers to raise their game. And I think it sounds like that's one of the things you want employers to do, is to like just pay people a living wage.
Right. But at the same time, you could go the other way as well, right? You don't want to be subsidizing that fast food restaurant to pay less because they know they're getting the $1,000 in UBI or whatever that number is. So it's like, hey, you just turned 18, you're getting your UBI, come work for me for X minus, as opposed to I need to pay you a living wage. So, like for my companies, I made sure one of the things that terrified me and would have embarrassed me mightily is going through the companies that I run and control is if any of my companies were on government assistance, right? Because it meant I wasn't
like those fast food restaurants that be like, hey, here's how you access your welfare benefits. Like you were like, let's keep my companies from ever having that headline.
Right. It's embarrassing to me. That's the ultimate socialism to me, where the government is subsidizing my payroll. To me, that doesn't get any worse than that personally, right? Everybody's got to make their own decision with their own money. And so you run, and in some cases it can be counterintuitive from a UBI perspective, but you run the risk of subsidizing those businesses for those people who are saying, you want this job? Here's what it's going to pay. Take it or leave it.